Today, we've been talking about gas. We've been talking about its impact on a developing economy like ours, how we can maximize the use of it in producing energy, not just use by families and homes, but particularly by industry. How can we make the most of the 5 trillion cubic feet of it that we are told sits right beneath our sea? To help us understand some aspects of this, let's say hello to Mark Thurber. He's from Stanford University. He's been speaking at the recently organized event on energy poverty and development in Ghana, held here at the IEA. Mark, it's good to speak to you.
Nice to be here.
And a lot has been said about gas and how it can be the next level, the next stage in the production of energy for a country like ours. But it's not easy. So many pitfalls. Why exactly is it that Ghana hasn't been able to maximize the use of natural gas in producing energy for its population?
Yeah, so gas has some unusual challenges. If you look at the energy sector, the electricity sector in Ghana, the first large source of energy was hydro, which is still very important, but now as Ghana grows, the share of electricity that's coming from hydro is declining. So Ghana's thinking about, well, what are other energy sources I can use to grow, and especially as more natural gas has been found offshore, that's an appealing option. And the thing about gas, so gas can be a great source of energy for electricity. It burns very clean, and it's you can have highly efficient gas plants, but it also has some real challenges. So one of the biggest issues with natural gas is the infrastructure for moving it around, pipelines, transportation of gas is very expensive. So you can move gas around in a few ways. I mean, you can move it by pipeline. You can also ship it across the ocean as LNG, as liquefied natural gas. But both of those are very expensive to develop. So the cost of that gas transportation makes it more difficult in some ways than other competing fuels. So if you look at coal, for example, coal, if you get it up to the surface, you can ship it by train, you can put it in a big bulk carrier ship, you can pile it up next to your power plant. So in that sense, it's relatively easy to handle. Gas is much trickier, right? You can't just store gas in a pile. You need a very expensive gas storage facility. And the fact that you can't store it means that you've got to be using it as you're flowing it into the pipeline. So it's easy to have too much of it or too little of it. And that means that when people are developing natural gas, they have to coordinate all the way from the field where the gas is produced to the final customer. So the customer is going to be worried that, oh, I built some gas-fired power plant or I built some gas-fired industrial facility, but there's no gas because the pipeline wasn't developed or the gas field wasn't developed. And then the gas producer, the person making the gas field, they're going to be worried, well, what if I produce this gas and there's no customer, right? So I won't get paid enough. I've spent all this money, for this gas pipeline and for developing the field. So it really has this coordination challenge that you just don't have. You don't have in coal. You don't have it so much in oil anymore because now there are a lot of oil pipelines and oil tankers, and those just aren't as expensive. So that makes gas hard, and it's especially hard to develop gas for use domestically in gas-using countries or gas-rich countries like Ghana, or sort of rich countries like Ghana. I mean, Ghana has a fair amount of gas, but not nearly as much as Nigeria or certain other countries that have a much bigger resource. So, the people who produce the gas, the oil companies, it's always going to be easier for them to say, oh, well, I just want to export this gas, right? Because I know I can turn it into LNG, I can ship it anywhere, I know there will be customers, I know I can get paid a good amount. Whereas if you say, no, we want you to develop this gas for domestic use in Ghana, well, they say, okay, well, that's fine. Well, so who are my customers? How much are they going to pay? Am I sure they're going to pay me enough, to pay for all this infrastructure I'm going to build. So rightly or wrongly, you always face those sort of challenges, that exports are easier than domestic use, and somehow you have to find a way to have gas using applications that will be reliable customers for the gas to finance all that infrastructure.
So, even if Ghana is able to crack the infrastructure problem, which they appear to have plans to do, moving car power to the west, they're going to set up these reverse pipelines and so forth, and they're going to convert some of the power plants from crude to gas, which will increase our capacity and our efficiency. So we'll probably end up somewhere around 85-90% by the time we've done all of this. Using about 85-90% of the gas that we're producing per day. But even if we do that, you highlight the problem of the customer. Where is the customer? So, and of course, our gas is not cheap at the moment.
Right.
How do we solve that problem? I mean, what's the path, or what's the recommendation? Sure.
About who the customer can be for gas, and how do you assure a good long-term customer. And there are several options. One option is just to throw in the towel and say, well, our big customer is going to be export, right? So we'll just, we'll build LNG, and at least we'll generate revenue for the country, fine, right? But clearly, Ghana wants to use more of the gas in Ghana as well, which is perfectly reasonable. So one thing that tends to work well for customers to develop a domestic gas market is to actually focus more at the start on industrial customers, because those may be customers where they're more willing and able to pay a higher price for the gas, because maybe they're using gas to make petrochemicals or make plastics, or maybe they're using gas to make fertilizers, or for industrial process heat, or for other kinds of applications. So a lot of those applications, industries may not have a lot of good alternatives to gas, right? So they may be willing to accept a higher price, and they're also attractive as anchor customers because they use large quantities. So a great example of an anchor customer in Ghana was when Ghana first built its big dam with the Volta River Authority. Valco, for manufacturing aluminum, was a great anchor customer, huge manufacturing, right? And so you can look for those same kinds of anchor customers with industrial uses of gas. So that's one solution to try to manage it.
Now, Ghana has programs to do this, one industrial, one factory, and so forth. Should we start positioning ourselves, as some countries have, as a sort of manufacturing hub? Because we have all this gas, we have all this power, which is available, and of course, if we have more customers, that ought to bring the price down a little bit as well. So should we perhaps look at positioning ourselves as a nation, as a location for other countries to come and set up their manufacturing plants? We're not far from most of the raw materials they need anyway. Is that an option?
I think that would be a great option. That takes, you can't develop it overnight, but I think, I think as you look at the development across the world, there's been a wave of development in China, East Asia, Southeast Asia. I think China, so companies go to these places because they have educated workforce, they have good infrastructure, they have good electricity and energy, and because they're low cost. But what happens over time is the places that used to be low cost, become high cost. So China is no longer very low cost, and so absolutely. I think Africa has a huge future role to play in manufacturing, and I think within Africa, Ghana is very well placed. It has many of the characteristics that I think you would look for. It has an educated workforce. It has I guess strong English language, which at least for some companies would be a plus. And I think Ghana's made a lot of progress. I mean, it's fast growing, it's developing. I think the government has the desire to fix challenges with infrastructure and with energy. So absolutely, I think it could be a manufacturing location.
Let's look to the future. We've got a finite quantity of gas that we have at our disposal. Is there, from your perspective, a good enough plan in place? Does Ghana have a proper, if you like, energy mix plan? Do we know exactly how much fossil, how much hydro, how much gas? Do we actually have a plan that demonstrates how much of everything we want to use in order to build our energy sector for the future?
Well, I guess one maybe slightly flippant answer is that no countries have very good energy plans. I mean, I think what's almost more important than, so I think the process of planning is very valuable. And from what I've seen, I mean, I think the Ghanaian government, within the Energy Commission and other parts of it, I think there is a sincere effort, to make these plans. And so I think that seems like it's going in the right direction. But I think in practice, if you look at the US, 15 years ago, did we have planned, an energy plan that coal would go from 50% of the electricity mix to 30% because suddenly we would develop these massive shale gas resources? Nobody planned on that, right? And so I think what's more important is responsiveness and pragmatism on the part of policymakers. And China, I think, is a very good example of this. I mean, I think China, throughout its industrial development, has made tons of mistakes, right? That China's a country that has historically a central planning mentality. When you have a central planning approach, you create lots of distortions, you end up with shortages. But I think what ultimately was to the credit of policymakers in China is that they've been able to, this is a problem, let's change course and fix it, right? This is a problem now, let's be pragmatic and fix it. And that, I think Ghana has that, right? And that's why I look forward to seeing how things develop. And just an example is what you mentioned, the reversing the pipeline, right? So that's a very pragmatic action by the government to say, well, we always assumed that this pipeline, was going to take gas from east to west, and hey, right now we've got a surplus on this part. We need to send it from west to east, right? And frankly, I mean, the same exact thing has happened in the U.S. when the shale gas revolution took off, and also oil from shale. Suddenly there wasn't the right pipeline infrastructure anymore, because you always were thinking that stuff was flowing one way, but then you had a real excess in a place where you never expected it, and you needed to flow the other way. So that's, so I'm an outsider. I don't know nearly as much about Ghana as you and the experts at IEA Ghana and everyone else that I've spoken with today. But I'm encouraged because I think Ghana's policymakers have the potential and that they've demonstrated the ability to be pragmatic, the ability to make mistakes, learn from your mistakes, and fix your mistakes, because you're always going to make mistakes, and especially as a country where when you're relatively early in developing your resources, you will make mistakes, right? And you'll do contracts where you think, in retrospect that wasn't a good contract, but as long as you can learn, then I think in the big picture, in the long run, you'll be fine.
Now, let me ask you this, and please don't be shy.
Yeah.
I know you sometimes might think outside looking in, it's not anything, but we want your expert opinion here. Do you think Ghana is developing its manpower, its know-how in the area of energy as fast as it should, bearing in mind all the things that are happening? Our institutions here that are supposed to be managing the value chain, how do you assess the know-how in this sector?
So, and I'm not trying to be diplomatic, I genuinely, don't know enough to say very well. But I guess what I can say is, so from this morning's meeting, where we had officials from the Energy Commission, from the from the ministry, talking about renewable energy and about nuclear, and from various other parts of the Ghanaian energy sector, I see, at least in that room, that there was a lot of knowledge and a lot of intelligence and an openness and a desire to learn. So I just don't have the knowledge to speak to, across the board is Ghana educating itself well enough, but I would say I saw promising signs, and I think that brings up one important point, which is always a challenge in resource development, is that as a government, you want to get the best deal for your citizens. As the oil company, you're trying to get the best deal for your shareholders, right? And the advantage the oil companies have is they have much more information than the government does, right? So the oil company, they have a large oil company. I mean, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of geologists, super sophisticated models, billions of dollars, right? So they put all that resource into assessing, is this oil field, is this gas field likely to yield, a lot of reserves, or are we going to get strong production from this? Is this going to be, economically attractive? And government, it doesn't matter if you're Ghana, if you're California, if you're Norway, government is always at a disadvantage because they just don't have that knowledge. The oil company can tell me, yeah, your gas, it's really hard to get out, it's going to be expensive, we're not sure if it's there, we're only going to come in if you give us very good terms, if you, this is our final offer, right? And it's tough, right? Because if I'm a government regulator, how do I know, right? And so I think that's a skill that develops over time, and I think that's the thing that Ghana can build its institutional knowledge is how to start to figure that out. And you're never going to have as much. You're never going to become geologists, if you're government, civil servants. But you can start to figure out ways. Okay, well we talked to all these different oil companies about this field. We had them independently come in and give us bids, right? And we sort of looked at those, and then we can sort of triangulate and say, okay, this seems like the range, and play them off each other, and try to find ways, to overcome some of those information asymmetries. But it's always difficult, yeah. But it's important to know that the oil company is always going to try to get the best deal for themselves, but as a government, you have to find out, okay, I know I have this disadvantage, but what are some ways that I can try to still get the best deal for my country and my citizens?
Mark, this has been enlightening.
Yeah, this is a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.